From an early age, Thomas sensed a quiet distance between himself and the other boys at school. He didn't belong to the rough-and-ready games that filled the playground or the loud joking culture of the boys' group. Instead, he felt an inexplicable pull toward garments and trinkets that others labeled feminine. Delicate fabrics, ribboned hair clips, the shimmer of costume jewelry. He guarded those feelings carefully, tucking them away in the small private world of his bedroom, too frightened to speak them aloud for fear of ridicule or worse. The secret stayed hidden until one ordinary afternoon when his mother was tidying his room and found, tucked behind shirts at the back of his closet, a pale pink dress. Instead of anger or scorn, her face softened. She did not demand an explanation or issue a reprimand. She drew him close and held him, whispering that he should always remain true to himself and live in a way that felt right to him. In that embrace, Thomas felt something unfamiliar and profound. Acceptance. Relief washed through him, yet it arrived mixed with a tremor of fear. Even with his mother's blessing, he was not ready to step fully into the openness he craved. For a long while he continued to keep his femininity locked away. He would let himself enjoy the dress only when alone, closing the door and letting the fabric brush his skin in secret. Over time, secrecy began to feel suffocating. The small freedom of private dress-ups no longer satisfied him. He wanted outward expression, the permission to be visible. Observing other people moving comfortably in their chosen identities made the ache more acute. He wanted that ease. One day his mother decided to help him move past the fear. She took his hand and led him out of the house and into a small sunlit boutique. They moved slowly through racks of color and texture until she chose a coordinated outfit for him. A dress that complemented his frame, matching shoes, and a compact purse. Thomas protested with nervousness, uncertainty tightening his voice, but his mother's steady encouragement persuaded him into the changing room. When he looked at himself in the mirror, the reflection felt like a truth he had been made to wait for. The image confirmed something his heart had already known. He breathed deeply for the first time in a long while. Walking out of the shop was a moment of intense vulnerability. Thomas gripped his mother's hand as if it anchored him to safety. She smiled at him the entire way, a reassuring presence that kept the world from feeling too hostile. As they passed other pedestrians, Thomas felt a soft unburdening. It was as though a weight he had carried for years had shifted, allowing him to stand a little straighter. The first days he spent presenting himself more openly were charged with anxiety, but also with an unexpected lightness. The reactions he faced mostly were kinder than he feared. Family members and friends offered support instead of condemnation, and their acceptance fed his courage. Still, Thomas knew that the path ahead would hold its share of challenges. Society's attitudes could be unkind and complicated. He worried about judgment, about the way strangers might treat him, and about the cruelty that sometimes hides behind polite silence. Yet the love and encouragement from those closest to him, especially his mother, felt like armor. With that backing, he began to believe he could meet whatever came. Even with this growing self-assurance, remnants of fear continued to seize him. He would catch himself in moments of panic, imagining the worst-case scenarios. Whispered taunts in hallways, teachers who wouldn't understand, old friends who might turn away. Sometimes he pulled up the familiar armor of anxious silence and tried to bury the desires again. But the urge to wear the clothes he adored, to paint his face and select accessories, returned persistently like a tide. He could not fully ignore it. At school, the tension between hope and terror played itself out in small ways. One morning, passing groups of girls in their uniforms, Thomas watched them move, heads high, easy laughter spilling between them. He envied their effortless surety, the simple way they inhabited their bodies and their clothes. He wished fiercely to feel that same unconcern. Later that day, weighed down by longing, he sat in his room and finally gave in to tears. His mother came in as she often did, sensing his gloom, and sat with him until the words came. He confessed his fears and his longing, the secret he had tucked inside for so long. She held him and spoke gently, telling him he was brave and that he deserved a life where he felt happy and whole. She promised to stand beside him. Her promise mattered. With her help, he started to experiment in modest steps. A touch of makeup first, then trying on different cuts and colors, learning which styles felt like extensions of himself and which felt foreign. His mother shopped with him, gave practical advice about fit and color, and grew comfortable cheering his small victories. Each new outfit he tried was like exploring a map of himself, and each affirmation from his mother helped him chart the territory. As the months unfurled, Thomas noticed shifts in how he moved through the world. The stares that once seemed like daggers became simply curious glances. Teachers and classmates grew accustomed to his appearance and in many cases moved on. That gradual adaptation eased his anxiety and allowed him to relax into social settings. To his own surprise, he began to draw in new friendships and even to enjoy attention that before would have made him retreat. The experience of being seen for who he felt he was became liberating. It clarified priorities that had been fogged by fear. But with liberation came new questions. Confidence opened a door to curiosity about the future. If wearing dresses and makeup felt authentic, what else might feel authentic too? Thomas began to wonder about the possibility of a fuller transition, medical, social, or both. He recognized that such a path would require time, resources, and likely more courage than he presently felt he possessed. There were practical and emotional hurdles. Confronting institutions that might not understand, managing relationships that could change, and coming to terms with how his identity would be interpreted by others. Even so, doubts and fears did not equal surrender. Instead, they became part of the careful deliberation he gave to the next steps. He read, asked questions, and leaned frequently on his mother's steadiness. Together they explored what it would mean to move forward, learning about options slowly, thoughtfully, and sensitively. Her presence continued to be an anchor, not to hold him back, but to steady him as he navigated decisions that would shape his life. As he matured, Thomas learned to balance courage with caution. He discovered supportive people beyond his family, a teacher who listened without judgment, a counselor who helped him understand his feelings, and friends who chose compassion over gossip. He also encountered the less gentle realities, moments of misunderstanding, sideways glances from strangers, and the occasional cruel comment. Those experiences were painful, but they did not erase the joy he felt when others acknowledged his true self with kindness. What remained constant was the slow, steady work of becoming. Thomas's story was not a single triumphant moment, but a series of small, meaningful steps. Each time he practiced a new expression of himself in public, a new outfit, a change in hairstyle, a name he preferred, he exercised a muscle that grew stronger with use. Each supportive conversation fortified his resolve. Each setback taught him resilience. He imagined different possible futures with a cautious optimism. Maybe he would pursue a medical transition one day. Perhaps he would choose therapy and social changes without medical intervention. He did not have to decide everything at once. The important part, he realized, was honoring the truth he had discovered in that mirror, and continuing to move toward a life that reflected it. With his mother beside him and a slowly widening circle of allies, Thomas felt prepared to meet the uncertainties ahead. There would be hard days, disappointments, and complicated conversations. There would also be moments of beauty. Afternoons spent choosing an outfit that felt like celebration, the warmth of a friend's support, the quiet pride of holding his head up in a room where he once would have cowered. The journey was only beginning, and that knowledge held both fear and promise. Thomas had stepped into the world differently than he had before, and in doing so he had opened the door to discovering who he could be, not in rushed finality, but in patient, unfolding truth. Thomas felt ready to move forward, even as a tremor of uncertainty lingered beneath his hope. His mother had noticed the subtle transformations in him, the way his shoulders seemed to carry extra weight, the restless look that clouded his eyes. She saw he was wrestling with something he could not easily name, and gently urged him to speak with a professional. Trusting her, Thomas agreed to see a therapist. The therapist welcomed him with patience and warmth. In their sessions, Thomas found a place where his feelings could be unpacked without fear or judgment. The therapist helped him to name and understand the complex emotions he had long kept hidden. They explored what living authentically might look like for him, and what options could be available, social steps, medical possibilities, and strategies to cope with the inevitable social fallout. Gradually, with guidance and reflection, Thomas arrived at a decision that felt honest. He wanted to begin hormone replacement therapy. Starting that process was both practical and symbolic. With his mother and his therapist alongside him, Thomas navigated appointments and answered questions that once would have terrorized him. Each visit, each small medical step, felt like permission. Permission to align his body with the identity he had held quietly in his heart for years. When the first changes began to appear, the subtle shifts in mood, in skin texture, in the way his form responded, Thomas experienced something akin to relief and miracle together. It was as though some heavy shroud had been lifted. Day-to-day living felt less like an act and more like truth. Even as this relief bloomed, fear kept pace. Living openly as a girl brought a profound freedom, yet it also ushered in a persistent anxiety that someone, somewhere, might unmask him and subject him to scorn. He became hyper-aware of other people's glances and of the small signals that might betray him. In quiet moments he found himself fixated on practicalities, how to shape his voice, how to style his hair, how to present in ways that minimized confrontation. He read obsessively. First-person accounts, medical guides, forums where others shared their strategies and missteps. He reached out online too, finding a handful of trans people who offered candid advice and the comfort of lived experience. An encounter in a shop gave him one of his first boosts of confidence. He bumped into an old schoolmate, someone who had known the younger, more reticent Thomas, and braced for recognition and the shock that might follow. The exchange, however, passed without incident. They spoke as if nothing remarkable had occurred, and when the conversation ended, Thomas felt a rush of validation. Perhaps this life could be navigable, perhaps his fears were not always destined to become reality. Still, pockets of fear remained. There were days he barely left his house, terrified that any outing might lead to ridicule. He felt adrift without a clear map for every situation, and the anxiety sometimes felt overwhelming. One afternoon, while moving through a mall, he happened upon a flyer for a local support group for transgender people. He hesitated, what if it was a space he couldn't inhabit? But eventually he walked into his first meeting. The group changed him. Around that circular array of chairs, he met others who carried similar histories of secret yearning and cautious emergence. They spoke of concealment and courage, of the micro-victories that felt enormous when stacked together. Using a chosen name, surviving a difficult conversation, finding a friend who asked questions with tenderness. Hearing their stories, Thomas felt less isolated. The group normalized many of his anxieties and, more importantly, offered practical coping tools and solidarity. He learned how others navigated coming out at work or school, how they managed medical appointments, and how they rebuilt their social circles. Buoyed by that community, his confidence grew steadier. He began to take more social risks, to present as his authentic self in more places. With time, the constant worry about what others thought receded. He made new friends who accepted him without interrogation. He found love in someone who saw him clearly and cared for him tenderly. A relationship blossomed with a boy who met him with respect and curiosity rather than judgment. Intimacy and companionship taught Thomas that vulnerability could lead to joy, not only pain. Not every relationship mended. His father remained absent, a silence that spoke more loudly than any argument could. The classmates who had once bullied him faded into the background of his life. Some dropped away entirely, others remained out of sight. Those losses were painful, but they were balanced by what he gained. A life cultivated by truth and the steady presence of people who chose to stay. Dr. Patel, the therapist who had first guided him, continued to be an anchor. She worked not only with Thomas but also with his mother, helping them build practical plans for safety and visibility. Together they planned gradual steps for social transition. Trying out his chosen name in trusted circles, easing into public presentation, and learning how to respond to questions or hostility. These were deliberate choices, aimed at making transition sustainable rather than sudden. The slow arc suited Thomas. It let him practice resilience and build habits of self-compassion. Months became a tapestry of change. Thomas learned to navigate public spaces with a growing sense of ease. He developed strategies for moments of harassment and found allies who would step in when needed. He continued to educate himself about hormone therapy, about legal name changes, about the history and communities that had long supported trans people. Each new piece of knowledge reduced his fear because it replaced unknowns with options. There were still hard days. He encountered ignorance and cruelty at times that hurt more than he expected. Yet in those moments he remembered the warmth of his mother's hand, the steadying voice of Dr. Patel, the faces from the support group who had once welcomed him with open stories. Those memories anchored him when he felt unsteady. Looking ahead, Thomas felt a quiet, guarded optimism. He recognized that the path forward would not be a straight line, and that there would be challenges, surgical decisions, changing legal documents, strained family ties. But he also understood that he didn't have to shoulder it all alone. He had allies, medical guidance, and a community that offered both practical help and emotional sustenance. One evening, standing in front of his bedroom mirror and tracing the curve of his jaw with questioning fingertips, Thomas smiled at the reflection he saw. It was not a grin of simple triumph but of a tempered joy. The joy of someone who had patiently unpeeled layers of fear and found a form beneath them that fit. He knew his journey was unfinished. There would be new decisions and difficult conversations to come. But he also felt whole in a way he had not before. He would continue to move forward with the people who mattered beside him, sometimes carrying him, sometimes walking with him, sometimes cheering from the sidelines, and that knowledge steadied him. When the final lines of this chapter settled, Thomas was not looking back with regret nor forward with blind certainty. He stood instead in the present, grateful for the support he had received, mindful of the losses that had shaped him, and quietly excited about the life he was creating. The path remained open, and for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to keep walking.